Hi, I'm Tyler Doherty, and on behalf of CDJW Consulting, we'd like to welcome you all here to our presentation. This is in response to the City of Fort Collins request for proposals to increase the resiliency of their water treatment facility after a wildfire in their watershed. Like I said, I'm Tyler Doherty, I'm project manager. We also have Ann Campbell, our watershed impacts expert, Danelle Johnson, our team coordinator, and Bo Wagner, who's our fire impact and contamination expert. So this is the presentation outline. First, we're going to discuss the High Park fire, summarize what happened, and then go into its impacts on the Cache-La-Poudre watershed, followed by an overview of the water treatment facility, and then potential upgrades that they can do to their facility, and dividing that up into modifications to their existing infrastructure, as well as brand new construction. And then we'll finish with our project organization. And now I'll hand over to Anna to discuss the fire.
Thanks, Tyler. So the High Park fire impacted the watershed flowing into the Cache-La-Poudre River, which gives Fort Collins water supply, starting on June 9th of last summer. It started from a lightning strike on private land about 15 miles away from Fort Collins. The Roosevelt National Forest was heavily impacted by this fire that burned over 87,000 acres, and it also burned over 250 homes down, and there was one fatality. This is an image, a NASA satellite image of Colorado in June of last summer. And you can see on the top is the High Park fire and the plume of smoke headed east here. But also I want to point to the Waldo Canyon fire and the Weber fire down by Durango. These are also happening at the same time. And this just illustrates that the wildfire impacts that will happen in Fort Collins are also extremely applicable all over our state. And many different water treatment plants will need to deal with the impacts of wildfire. The Cache-La-Poudre River, which is one of the water sources for Fort Collins drinking water, drains almost 2,000 square miles of land that is the Cache-La-Poudre watershed. This is a picture of the Joe Wright Reservoir, which is the largest reservoir in this watershed and one of the main sources for Fort Collins drinking water. This was not used as a resource for water for over 100 days following the High Park fire because of the extreme sediment loading and flooding that was impacted on the Cache-La-Poudre River. This is an image of the Cache-La-Poudre River following one of the first rainstorms after the High Park fire last summer. As you can see, it just looks completely muddy and it's just filled with sediment. And luckily for Fort Collins, they had another input for water, the Horsetooth Reservoir. And the water in the Horsetooth Reservoir actually comes through a tunnel from the west side of the Continental Divide through Rocky Mountain National Park. So none of the was completely out of the burned areas. That was the resource Fort Collins got to use, but many smaller communities that are impacted by fires may not have that as a resource. So they would need to figure out how to treat this high sediment load of water immediately after fires. Now, Bo will talk about the potential impacts of fires.
Yeah, so the potential impacts that the city of Fort Collins has had to deal with and will continue to deal with are the following. So the first is the increased sediment loading. The sediment includes the soil, metals, dissolved organic matter, which includes organic carbon, and then the firefighting foams that are used for containment. This increased sediment loading is caused by the process of the hydrophobicity of the soil, which occurs from the consumption of the hydrophobic hydrocarbons in the deeper soil that volatilize in the heat of the fire and then condensate on cooler soils surrounding the fire. The hydrophobic hydrocarbons then form a layer that repels the water, which creates higher runoff potential in rain events and in spring snow melt. The next potential impact are the foams that are used for containment. These are halogenated sulfates, which there's no known human health effects yet because they're not really regulated by the EPA, but they could potentially create aesthetic problems in the drinking water treatment plant for taste and odor. The next potential impact are the organic carbon loading. So as I mentioned in the sediment part, it's made up of organic matter, which comes from the decomposing of organisms like plants and animals in the soil. Almost half of organic matter is organic carbon, and the problem with organic carbon is that it has the potential to react with the disinfection process in the drinking water plant and can create disinfection byproducts like trihalomethanes and haloacetic acids, which can be carcinogenic. The last impact is the mobilization of contaminants. This is mostly from the hydrophobicity of the soil in the increased runoff from rain events. The contaminants listed above tend to happen in higher quantities and faster flow rates. So the first contaminant of concern are metals, such as mercury, iron, manganese, aluminum. So these can cause problems like mostly with aesthetic issues, with taste and odor, and then corrosivity in the piping and hardness of the water. They can also be neurotoxin or prevent toxic effects to wildlife and humans. The next contaminant is dissolved organic carbon. As I mentioned before, it has the potential to create disinfection byproducts, which can be harmful to human health. The next contaminant is turbidity. Turbidity is basically the dirtiness of the water, as the previous group mentioned. The standard for the city of Fort Collins can't exceed 1 NTU because it's a conventional water treatment plant. And from the studies from the Hayman fire and from the fires in British Columbia a couple years ago, the average NTU rating from a stream that's experienced a rain event or spring snowmelt was about 8 times greater than the normal inflow. And another part of turbidity is the total suspended solids that is in the water. And from the Hayman fire studies and the studies from the British Columbia wilderness, that can increase about 10 times the magnitude of a normal influent. The next contaminant of concern are nitrates. And nitrates form from the oxidation of organic matter. From the studies from the Hayman fire and from British Columbia, they said that nitrates aren't a very big issue in comparison to turbidity and dissolved organic carbon in terms of their inputs. The next contaminant is taste and odor compounds. This can occur from natural organic matter in the water and also from metals like iron and aluminum. And then the last contaminant is the firefighting foams. And as I mentioned before, there's not much known about the health effects of firefighting foams on humans. They can have an effect on wildlife. So we'll see what we can do with that. I'll turn it over to Tyler, and he'll talk about the alternative ways that we can treat these contaminants.
All right, so as we mentioned, the city draws from not only the Cashel River, but also the Horn Hughes Reservoir. Their plant is design rated at 87 million gallons a day. And they're also a silver part of the Environmental Leadership Program, which means they exceed federal and state regulations. And so we're going to try and maintain that level of treatment. This may look familiar. This is the overview of their water treatment facility. The Cashel River water comes in, goes through a pre-sedimentation process, after which it's blended with the Horsetooth Reservoir water, goes through a rapid mix where coagulants are added, then through the flocculation and sedimentation process, after which it goes through the filters, and then it is treated, goes through the clear well to provide the appropriate contact time, and then out to the constituents in the city. So this is an overview of the alternatives we can, treatment alternatives we can provide. As you can see, we divided them into improvements to existing infrastructure as well as brand new construction, and we're going to go through them in the order they occur in the plan. So first of all, they have pre-sedimentation. Essentially, it's a large open basin that allows really slow flow so the particles will settle out. This will help turbidity in metals, because a lot of the metals are actually associated with the turbidity that's in the water. So we propose building a new pre-sedimentation basin, essentially to extend the residence time in the pre-sedimentation process overall. This basin could be in parallel or in series and operate continuously along with the current one, or it could be an entirely ancillary basin that would only be used during high flow and high loading situations. Pre-oxidation is the next step in the process. So essentially, here's a really very simplified flow chart of what happens to, for example, aqueous iron and manganese. It comes into contact with the oxidant, chlorine dioxide, and it creates solid compounds which can be settled out or precipitated later. This has been upgraded to their current system because we could change the coagulant or the dosing of it depending on the influent water quality to make sure that we can take care of metals as well as many of the taste and odor compounds that are in the carbon is another treatment process that they currently have and that we can upgrade. It essentially works because it's very active and can absorb a lot of different contaminants, such as a lot of the metals, the taste and odor, as well as dissolved organic compounds. And we can change the type of carbon or the dosing in order to take care of a lot of the contaminants. The metals, taste and odor, and dissolved organic compounds, they're going to be an influent during a high loading situation. Coagulation is the next step. Currently they use aluminum sulfate, or alum, as well as a organic polymer to essentially destabilize the particles that have slow settling velocities that won't settle out in a sedimentation process. So that instead of the particles being charged and not coming into contact with each other, they destabilize when they come into contact, they will stick and then eventually settle out. Polymer essentially just acts as a long, essentially sticky string to create bigger particles. And we can basically upgrade it by changing the coagulant or the polymer to something more effective. Flocculation follows, and this is essentially a process that develops larger particles so they'll settle out better. We can do an upgrade as well as new construction. Upgrading will be optimizing the three mixing chambers and the mixing velocities to create the biggest, fluffiest flocks we can so they'll settle out as best as possible. Or we can just build more flocculation basins, again, to increase residence time and produce the best flocks that'll settle out easiest. And then sedimentation, very similar to pre-sedimentation. It's another large basin where the flocks can settle out. An upgrade to this would be adding baffles. Baffles are essentially making the water go around structures that we would implement, which decrease the amount of energy in the water, and this energy, this decreased energy would allow the particles to settle out faster and more effectively. Again, you can just build more sedimentation basins to increase the residence time overall and settle out more of the contaminants before the filtration process. The final step of filtration, currently they're operating dual media filters with anthracite coal above sand. Changes to this could include modifying the media, maybe the media depths or the actual different types of media that they're using, as well as optimizing the runtime and backwash, because during a high loading period, the filters will become clogged that much faster, and so eventually they have to backwash them. And if we optimize this process, we can keep as many filters running as possible. We can also essentially just build more filters, so that even if these filters do get swamped, there's a lot more of them, so that you can thoroughly backwash without having the concern that you're not going to get adequate backwashing or that the system's going to be overwhelmed. Now I'm going to pass on to Danelle to talk about the project organization.
Okay, so with all the many changes that he has suggested, we've decided to come up with a decision matrix. Here's a sample. We'll have the other ones listed as well. But for each different treatment process, we will take a weighted average on it in the different parameters for like capital cost, operating cost, removal efficiency, ease of implementation, land usage, and then we'll also take into account what the client finds to be the most important. And we will also take into consideration different peer-reviewed journals, and also we'll look at different cities that have had impacts from fire, like Denver from the Hayman fire, or here in Boulder with the 4 Mile Canyon fire. And so here's our schedule for our reports. For our alternative assessment, we will have that report done on March 14th, and we will present our findings on March 19th. And then we will come up with a preliminary design based on the best treatment options, and we will present that on the 25th, and we will provide a written report on the 30th. And so here is our overall budget, and we plan to split the tasks evenly among us, and with a total of 533 hours and $37,460. And we have a multi-tiered quality control process where we will review our own work, and then we have a partnership set up where Anna and I will review each other's work, and Bo and Tyler will review theirs, and then we will come together as a group and review everything. And then we'll take our client input with that, and then we will hopefully come up with the best possible design for the city of Fort Collins.
Thank you all for being here. That's our plan for the Fort Collins Water Treatment Facility, and Next, we have our list of sources up here. We're very excited about this opportunity to create a very resilient system that can handle any sort of input after a wildfire. And we would be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Eli?
So you had mentioned that they're using chlorine dioxide as a pre-oxidant ahead of the treatment plant.
Yeah.
Are they then dosing with more chlorine at the end, or what are they using for the residual throughout this?
They have chlorine at the end as well, yeah.
Is it
And so,
is it combined chlorine or free chlorine?
I don't know about the end chlorination, but there is concern at the for the chlorine dioxide addition at the beginning with the high organic, high DOC, that it'll create disinfection byproducts right at the beginning. So that's one thing we're going to have to analyze and ensure that we don't create those at the beginning, because that's obviously very strict regulations and dangerous to human health.
Hey,
There are no more questions? Oh.
So what is their current design capacity for the treatment processes as compared to their current average flow rate that they are actually treating?
We haven't been able to obtain any information about their current average flow rate, but I would assume it doesn't come close to that design, as we haven't found out about any plans to increase their size overall. And so I would assume it's probably roughly half to 3/4, as that seems typical based upon other water treatment systems.
So what was that number? Sorry.
87 MGDs. Jenna, do you also have a question?
Yeah, kind of about that. Did you guys design around a flood? Like what would happen if it did flood? Since you said such.
We're not considering a flood situation. We're just considering regular rainfall immediately after a precipitation event, when there's going to be a lot of ash that'll be swept away very easily.
But we will need to do a further analysis of a rainfall event and see how much sediment will flow into the wastewater treatment plant, or water treatment plant, and what we're going to see from it. Eli?
well, you were talking about something earlier with like the soil becoming hydrophobic. I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little more about that. I've never heard about that before.
So basically, hydrophobicity occurs when the fire is in contact with the soil. So the heat of the fire kind of creates it. It volatilizes the natural hydrocarbons that are in the soil, which go into the atmosphere, and then when they're cooled, they condensate on the other soil, and these hydrocarbons are naturally hydrophobic. And so when they condensate on the soil, they create a layer of hydrophobic just film. And then when the water falls or the snow melts, it has no way to permeate the soil to replenish the groundwater, but it just runs off into the river. Yeah.
There are no further questions. We thank you very much for being here, and hope you have a great day.